Welcome to the Put On Waivers Media Group, home of the Put On Raiders podcast and the Student Body Right podcast. This is your place for the best breakdowns and the best insight for those who fight on and bleed silver and black. Now, here are your hosts, Dwayne Douglas and Ryan Holmes.
And welcome everybody to the glorious episode of the Put On Raiders podcast. I'm your host, Dwayne Douglas, along with Ryan Holmes, and we are podcasting on the beautiful shores of the Pacific Ocean. Beautiful day out here in Southern California. The weather's back now, so a little back to normal, at least for us. PORSBR is my Twitter handle, and RHOLM22 is Ryan. Thanks for everybody listening or watching the show from Meriden, Ohio, Los Angeles, California, Sacramento, California, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Charlotte, North Carolina, North Adams, Massachusetts, Anchorage, Alaska, British Columbia, and Tacoma, Washington. Thank you for listening and watching the show. Ryan, again, we are the non-playoff edition of the Raiders podcast.
I think that glorious edition is we don't have to watch that product anymore for another 8-9 months.
That was pretty bad. It was gross. I want to say really good to see that DeMar Hamlin is coming around and getting healthy. And also we want to wish healthful wishes to the rushing champion's father, who surprisingly went down. It was great. I mean, his looked like Josh Jacobs' son was quick on the draw there to call 911. That kind of was a lifesaver there for his grandfather. So hopefully Papa Jacobs is okay. I think want to roll through a little bit of news and notes from before we get to the Raiders about week 18 here. The Bears winning, the Bears having the number one pick throws a monkey wrench into a lot of different things. It's kind of funny. But we're all going to find out. I think you made a good point about it. Is like we're going to find out how much they actually like Justin Fields, because they're in a position where they can either just take one of these guys, or if they're willing to trade back and maybe to the Raiders at 7 or somebody like that, they can really set themselves up to have a mega draft.
Yeah, we're going to find out what that front office thinks and how they value the quarterback position. Are they a size, speed, intangibles? Do they have a prototype? Do they want the big physical guy that can move? Or are they looking more for a pure pocket passer? And if they are, then they may sit there and take CJ Stroud or Bryce Young. The key with it's a new regime. This regime did not draft Justin Fields. They inherited him. So you have a first-year head coach in Matt Eberflus, a new GM there. Maybe they do decide, you know what, maybe we can trade Fields and get a couple of picks for him. Fields will be going into year 3. So they're going to have to pay him in 2 years. So the obvious is we can hit reset, have 5 years to figure this thing out and build up this roster and take the quarterback we want. So they're in a great position. I know a lot of people just assume they're not going to take a quarterback. I wouldn't assume that at this point, because you don't know what that front office thinks of Justin Fields. And the flip side is, if they do decide to hold on to Fields, they can sell that pick for a ton of draft capital and move down and really build up that roster around Fields. But they're going to have to pay Fields in 3 years. They have to pick that 5th-year option in 2 years. So they're going to have to figure out what they want to do moving forward.
Yeah, and because you would think if they take a quarterback, then there's really no where to go if you want Fields or Bryce Young, because Houston definitely is taking a quarterback, no question about it. Like there's not even number 2 pick. They're taking one, no question about it. So you can't even worry about that. Staley decides to play his guys, and then I think Mike Williams went down. We'll see.
And Bosa got hurt, but his doesn't look as bad.
So I go back and forth with this, because there was a year where Tom Coughlin beat the undefeated Giants. They had a game at the end of the year that was kind of it was one of the best games I've ever seen in my life, but it's actually meaningless. But they played the Patriots head to head. Patriots were able to win that game, but it kind of set up for what was a great Super Bowl between the Patriots. And I am, it's football. You can't play football scared. I mean, you could have. I mean, they could have been able to maybe to rest their guys. I'm not sure where you stand on it. I think it depends on your situation. If I'm the Charger head coach, just knowing the bad luck, knowing the omens of people getting hurt, everything like that, I might have maybe just say, if you're Brandon Staley, this is my first playoff opponent, first playoff year. Let me just The game means nothing to Denver. Nothing really good could come out of it. Maybe I sit people in this one.
I look at it as they had nothing to gain by playing them.
Yes.
And you have two very important pieces of that roster, Mike Williams and Joey Bosa, who have been injured all season.
Yes.
There was no reason to risk those two players. Now, you can't sit 22 guys,
Mm-mm.
but you can sit your important players that are important factors in the outcomes of these games. You didn't have to play those two guys. They haven't played with those two guys for most of the season. So I don't buy that argument from Brandon Staley. I probably would have played Herbert at least for a quarter or two just to get him some more reps. He's a young quarterback.
Yeah, you got to do
but
that.
Derwin James is still out there late in the third quarter. I watched the third quarter of that game. Like, I would have started pulling those guys out. Like, it's at that point, there's nothing to be gained from it. What if Austin Eckler goes down, Herbert goes down, Derwin James goes down? It doesn't matter. Like, you can't get the 4 seed, you can't get the 6 seed. You're locked in as the number 5. That was a poor decision on his part.
Yeah, I think every situation is different, and in their situation, I'm the pieces that you talked about, like, Herbert has to play, the offensive line has to play. You can't just replace an entire offensive line. But and part of it is bad luck because like it's just the way football is. But I definitely would have considered doing that because being that coach of that team. Rodgers has a legacy here where there are a lot of either playoff games or games like this that he's lost in Lambeau. Like, it's a lot. It's a lot of losses there. Dan Campbell, they bit some ankles and won this game. They found a way. I thought Goff has had a pretty good second half. I think he has I don't know if he threw a pick last night, but he had some stretch where he had 15 touchdowns and no picks in the last 8 games of the year. He's playing really good football. Be interesting to see what they do in the draft. But for Rodgers going forward, I did have a question about, somebody had a question about Dave from Laguna Beach had a question about the cap hit. Like, if they had to trade him, can you explain to him what as far as from a Green Bay standpoint, what happens to their cap if they tried to attempt to trade Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, I looked at this a couple of weeks ago. Like, he just signed a massive extension last off season. He's guaranteed $60 million next year. He's not walking away from $60 million. I do not see him retiring. He can't really force a trade either. The cap hit's $98 million. Like, Green Bay can't trade the quarterback and take a $98 million hit. That's just not going to happen. So he's either going to have to get released. I don't know what the cap hit is if he gets released, but it's still going to be astronomical. I think it's $99 million off the top of my head. So either way, you're looking at a $100 million cap hit to move on from Aaron Rodgers. The only thing Green Bay can try to do is get him to retire if they don't want him there anymore, which would be hard to do with what he's done for that franchise. So I really don't see him playing for another team next year.
Yeah. So when you watch the other, and
that's half your cap.
It is. Hey, it's halftime. Time out. Thank you for listening to the Put on Raiders podcast and watching it on YouTube. We definitely appreciate all the support. But listen, we need you to do that thing where you subscribe. And if you're on iTunes, we need you to do that thing where you leave a 5-star review. So when you watch the other shows and you watch Kyle Hurd, people like that who just say, oh, I have Aaron Rodgers in San Francisco or all these other places, like, they don't talk about it's all about clicks. It's not about actual reality of how the cap works. And that's an issue. Like, the cap is huge.
The cap's turned on. It's not Madden where you can just go turn it off.
Yeah, it was cool when you could turn off the cap in Madden. I used to do it all the time. First year head coaches around the league. So many doing having great job. Did a great job. Mike McDaniel, scoring like 9 points, winning a home game. All these guys doing a great job. Minnesota came through and made the playoffs, but not Josh McDaniels.
There was 5 that made it, just for the record.
5 head coaches who made the playoffs who were in their first year with their teams. And this kind of blew up in his face. And this year, and I think the thing that really is kind of weird, because so many things in this season with Josh McDaniels that you can't even count, but it just seemed like maybe almost like a laissez-faire approach at the beginning that kind of like, okay, now this is serious. Oh no, the season actually started. Like you could tell, like, in halfway through the Charger game, like, the Chargers were way more aggressive and the Raiders were playing catch up. The entire game, as far as the physicality and aggressiveness of the game, he didn't know what kind of team he wanted to run. It seemed like that. There's so many things about Josh McDaniels. I saw more trick plays and screen passes. Like there's a lot of different things that really hurt McDaniels here. Let's looking back on season one. I mean, the blown leads. It's just so many things. What are some of the things that you take away from it? And I'll hit after.
I think the biggest takeaway is this misnomer that they misjudged the roster. Like they came in, saw the roster, and said, "Okay, we're going to pay Crosby, Waller, Renfro, Carr. We're going all in. We're going to go get Chandler Jones. We're going to get Devontae Adams. We're not going to do anything to the offensive line. We're not going to really bolster up the defensive interior." And then they get to training camp, and then they have no clue what they want to do with the offensive line. We're rotating pieces left and right. We're playing Josh Jacobs in the Hall of Fame game. The guy led the NFL in rushing. You kind of just got this idea where like they really didn't know what they had, which is interesting because you have a whole front office that has pro player personnel people that their job is to scout the entire NFL and know what is on this roster and have an idea of what's on this roster. You have coaches that there's probably still a couple around that knew what was on this roster. I don't know how many coaches in the prior regime. Maybe there's none. I think McDaniel's probably brought in all his own guys, but Champ Kelly's job in Chicago is to know what's on the roster. Dave Ziegler's job in New England is to know what's on the roster of all these other teams. And then they get into the first game of the season and they don't run the ball for the first 3 weeks. Like they don't even give Josh Jacobs the ball. It's literally, we're just going to throw it all around the yard. Oh, wait, that's not working. So let's just go heavy personnel and run the ball. And it just seems like Josh McDaniels didn't have an idea of how to make all these pieces work. He didn't have a plan to get Devontae Adams the ball. He didn't have a plan to what to do with Darren Waller and Hunter Renfro and Josh Jacobs. And it was kind of like he was just back there calling plays. And he was forced, because of the injuries to Renfro and Waller, they were forced to basically give the ball to Josh Jacobs. They didn't have any other option. Mm-hmm. And then they rode that for a few weeks. And then you kind of just didn't get a feel for like how this offense was ever going to be put together. They weren't playing well. The offensive line didn't play well. The quarterback didn't play well. And for all the people that are out there thinking Derek Carr's taking all the blame, well, Derek Carr's moving on. Now we're going to turn on Josh McDaniels. He's going to get the heat now. Dave Ziegler's going to get the heat. Pretty soon, Patrick Graham's going to get the heat. The defensive players are going to get heat. There's not one scapegoat in this. I hate when I see that term scapegoat. All of these guys are liable for what happened. Yeah. And it goes back to like, they went all in with a roster that wasn't very good. And I talked about it on this podcast, as well as the Full Press Raiders podcast last year, as they were going on a run to make the playoffs, that 2 to 3 years down the line, we're going to feel all of these draft picks that were wasted by John Gruden are going to show up. Like it was easy to put a Band-Aid over it and limp into the playoffs last year. But the fact is this roster was nowhere near competing at the ultimate level to get one of these Super Bowl trophies that's behind me. This roster's and I hate to tell Raider fans this roster's 2 or 3 years away from doing that as well. So like they can put a Band-Aid on it and bring in a Tom Brady or a Jimmy Garoppolo and think they're going to make the playoffs. The goal is not to make the playoffs. The goal is to win a championship. And this roster is a couple of years away from doing that if they get them all these decisions right over the next 2 or 3 drafts.
And you mentioned the rushing. The first 3 games of the year, they ran the ball 13 times in the first game. They ran the ball 21 times in the second game, and they ran the ball 19
How many
times.
did Jacobs? He didn't have 20, I don't think, in the first 3
No,
games.
I mean, I'm going through the game log itself. Yeah. So, but I mean, even against the the Chargers have a history. Like, here's my thing about Josh McDaniels. Like, he's supposed to be the guy who's a Belichick guy, ultra prepared, over prepared, all this stuff like that. You are going to play the first game of the year against the Los Angeles Chargers with the history. They have a history of not being able to stop the run. They don't stop the run against anybody, right?
They didn't this year either.
And they didn't this year either. And they still made the playoffs, amazingly enough, right? That actually can't happen, Raider fans. People on Twitter told me that can't happen. But you have a running back who's averaging 5 yards a carry in game 1. In game 1, he's averaging 5 yards a carry, and you can't notice that. And like I don't understand how the sidelines in the National Football League work. I don't understand how they work, because like, hey coach, like we're killing it on the run game. Can we continue to do some of that? Like I'm not sure. Like, I mean, you got Mick Lombardi, you got a quarterbacks coach, you got a running backs coach. Like, what is everybody doing on game day? And like you said, like you said, I think the part of it was like just like this lost abyss of what he wanted to do. And this whole, like, I heard like their game plan specific. So everybody they play is going to be a game plan for. How do you not have 20 carries That was probably the first big warning sign for the season. If you don't rush the ball for over 20 times, 25 times against the Chargers, you're doing it wrong. Like you're 100% doing it wrong.
I think the misnomer, going back to the misjudging the roster, is they didn't think Josh Jacobs was any good. They took Zamir White in the 4th round, who had what, 16, 17 carries on the season, and Britton Brown in the 7th round, who I think he was active for 1 game all year. And let's look at Dave Ziegler's draft. I know everyone's like, give this guy a draft. What did he do in the last draft that gives you any hope? I know a lot of Raider fans are excited about Dylan Parham. Dylan Parham did not play well the second half of the season, and he's probably a center, so they played him out of position by need this year. Zamir White couldn't get on the field. Neil Farrell was an afterthought. Matthew Butler was inactive more than anything. I don't think if he made 1 play all season. And Thayer Mumford, everyone's excited about Thayer Mumford. Like, they wouldn't play Thayer Mumford. They had plenty of opportunities to put him out there and didn't. So I'm nowhere near saying this guy's ready to be a starter next year. At best case scenario, he's got to fight to stay on the roster because Justin Herron's coming back that they traded for. They're probably going to bring Illuminor back. You think they're going to bring at least 1 offensive tackle in. It wouldn't surprise me if Thayer Mumford is on the practice squad or not on this roster next year if they upgrade the offensive line properly. And then Britton Brown, again, so they got nothing out of this draft class this year other than Dylan Parham playing it at a below average level for most of the season.
Yeah. I mean, here's the reality of Ziegler. Does Ziegler get a GM job if his high school buddy is not a head coach? He's not Adam Peters. You know what I'm saying?
Not last year and probably not in the next coming years because New England's roster is a mess too.
Yeah. So let's just be real. So again, they hired now. I think Reggie McKenzie did put in some years. Was definitely qualified for the position. Whatever happened with him, it happens. GMs get fired, whatever. But when GM gets fired, they go into an abyss and you never hear from him again. But and then after that, it was Mike Mayock on TV talking about the draft. And hey, generational players, all this other stuff that we heard about for him. He had a draft class that was completely not in the league anymore. And then you have a guy who is not highly regarded, and then again a guy who is somebody texted me the other day and said, "Is Kelly more qualified to be a GM than Ziegler?"
If you make that argument, yes,
you can make that argument. You know what I'm saying? So that's not that is something that I feel what you're saying. The fact that this has just not been a good offseason. And I understand that he traded for Devontae Adams, but at the end of the day, where was the biggest thing about back to McDaniels? Where was the explosiveness on offense at times? You know what I mean? Where was the how bad were they in 2-minute situations? At the end of halves and the end of games, it was they were just walking up the field. What are we doing here? You know what I mean? That was those when you had to play quick, they couldn't play quick. It was tough. It was a tough watch this year, no question about it, from a guy who quote unquote has over 30 years of NFL experience.
Yeah, I would argue that I thought the offense was too predicated on taking deep shots, because where was the quick game? Where was the crossing routes? Where was the running backs that you saw in New England get so involved in the run game? The screens, he called screens when it was 2nd and 3rd and long in obvious situations. He never hit them with surprise screen here or there. I didn't really feel like he called a ton of great games. And there were some games that he called that you're like, okay, now he's attacking coverage tendencies by other teams, but. Overall, I would argue that it was early in the season. It was, we have to keep everyone in to help the offensive line while we don't know what we're doing. And you're running 2 or 3 man routes and they're covering them up with 5 or 6 or sometimes 7. So it's hard to get guys open, and there was no outlet. There was no check down. And then instead on these last couple of games, he was really aggressive pushing the ball. And there were times he probably should have taken the check down. He just didn't. Debating whether I want to watch that Kansas City all 22. I downloaded it this morning and I don't know. I don't know if I want to see it, but they have to win in year 2. It looks like going forward, there's probably an ultimatum here from Mark Davis. I'm not sold it's 100% they have to make the playoffs, because if they do go the route of a young quarterback, then that changes everything. But back to the whole this roster misnomer. At one point we counted. I think it was week 3 or 4, like 32 of the 53 were new. Like they brought in all these players. And to say we didn't understand the roster, well, how did you not understand it? You brought in 60 to 70% of the guys that are on it.
Yeah.
Those are your guys. And then all of a sudden it started like, and for anyone that didn't watch the Rams Seahawks game, you can thank Jonathan Abram for screwing up the Raiders draft pick, because there was a running into the punter that gave the Seahawks a first down with like 8 minutes left in that game when they were losing, where Abram basically threw or tossed a lineman from the Rams into the punter that got the flag. So if Abram doesn't do that, the Raiders are picking 6th right now, and that game never makes it to overtime. So Jonathan Abram came back to hurt the Raiders right there.
Yeah, of course. Well, John got to do his thing. Yeah, got to be aggressive. Gotta be aggressive. Yeah, I mean, those things along with like what happens when you're coaching the entire team. And listen, I love we talked at length about how we wanted Dayball, how we wanted
Peterson and Harbaugh. Those are like
Peterson and Harbaugh. You're the head coach, so your defense. What happens on the defensive side is that's you. I mean, that represents you. So I like the fact that Dayball, he's in charge, but he doesn't call the plays. And like some people call the plays, and it's fine. Like Kyle Shanahan calls the plays. Like, I mean? Like it works. It works or whatever. It's kind of a brain trust there. But I mean, at some point, like how do you sit there and just say, okay, this is going to be acceptable on defense? This is like, I mean, they had their moments this year where they got stops when they needed to. The Arizona game, they were up 20, they were down 23 nothing. They let Kyler Murray go crazy, but in overtime, they made those plays, and then you had to run for a fumble, stuff like that. But like just some of the tackling, and talk about, open middle field, close. Well, like 7-Eleven, that middle field was always open. It was always open for this Raider defense. And how do you sit there and say, okay, I'm going to allow you as a head coach, as a defensive coordinator, to continue to rush 3 people in critical moments in games? Like if you rush 3 and then and as soon as the ball is snapped, you send a couple of other guys, I could deal with that. But just to rush 3 and drop 8, like what? Like this is the National Football League. Like, I mean, like I could be playing flag football, and the more time you give a quarterback, I can tell you, honestly, they're going to make the play. And that is just bad football.
Yeah, I've never understood the rush 3, and I posted on Twitter Patrick Graham loves the rush 3, and there was a bunch of people coming to his defense. Well, he doesn't have guys that can cover, and I'm like, so you can't.
That's why
cover,
you blitz.
So let's let the quarterback have even more time to throw the ball. That's like the reverse argument. You need to bring pressure. You need to at least bring 4 and give the lineman something to think about. But you rush 3, and now we're just sliding towards Crosby. Crosby's getting double teamed.
Triple team
a lot.
Yeah.
There was triple teams that I saw on video from last week, where like they bring a back, a tight end across, they slide the guard, and it's like, as good as Max Crosby is, like he's not beating triple teams to get to the quarterback in 2.5 seconds. It's just not happening. But for me, Patrick Graham would definitely be in the hot seat. I don't think he's going anywhere. By all reports, he's coming back, but like the effort this defense played with for most of the season leaves a lot to be desired. Just the coverage on the back. And now we didn't see the big blown coverages like you saw in Paul Gunther's game. We just saw guys that were like pretty much open, running across the field, but no one was running completely wide open. They were open by a couple of yards. But again, like this secondary was rebuilt in the offseason for the most part by this current regime. They brought in Rocky Sin. They brought in Averett. They brought in Sam Webb. They brought in Deron Harmon. Those guys played a lot of snaps. That wasn't on the prior regime. And I think Hobbs, Merrick, Abram, who was released, and then clearly Robertson were the holdovers. But same thing when we go to the linebacker room, like a lot of injuries, but they brought in Jayon Brown. He turned out not to be any good. They brought in Blake Martinez, and he said, I'm going to go sell Pokemon cards rather than play for you guys. Yes. They brought in Luke Masterson. They brought in Darian Butler. They kept these young guys on their roster. And when it came time to play, Luke Masterson was running around like a chicken with his head cut off when he had to play. It was not good. It was bad. And then Divine Diablo didn't develop, and Denzel Perryman was hurt again, which he's been hurt most of his career. So I think spinning it forward, like they should be able to bring back some of those guys relatively cheaply. I would expect Perryman to come back on a modest deal. I could see Deron Harmon coming back on like a 1 year, $1 million to $2 million deal is kind of like a third or fourth safety, just in case they can't find someone else. And if you have to play with him again, you can. But I think that they're going to need to upgrade basically everywhere. There's only 4 guys on this defense in my mind that are safe to be in the starting lineup. Actually, I would say Chandler Jones is safe just based on his contract. I would say Max Crosby. I thought Trayvon Merrick, man coverage skills there towards the end of the year, and he manned up Kelsey pretty good the last game. I think they found a role for him as kind of, a strong safety instead of a free safety. And then I would say Nate Hobbs is probably safe as a slot. I wouldn't say he's safe as an outside guy. But you're going to be playing so much nickel, but everything else is wide open in the offseason.
They have how many picks they got? 11?
I think it's 12 projected with the 3 comp picks.
With the 3 comp picks. So the question I have is, do you they need a quarterback. They need a young quarterback. And we'll dive into quarterbacks in this offseason because I want to go through all these guys and we'll give you folks our opinions on those guys. But can they, the cost is going to be, it's going to cost a lot of on the draft chart. It's going to cost a lot to go from 7 to 2, even if and then you're gonna have a 7-1, and then that's if those guys are willing to do it, because they might want the quarterback, and they'll hang up the phone on you. So it's a tough spot for them, right? Because 7, you might be looking at a guy like Levis or Richardson, and
Levis is not making it to 7. I know people think it will. I'm not a Levis fan, but he's not making it to 7.
Well, with the Colts at 4, the Colts are sitting there at 4. So yeah, 100%. So he's not gonna. So probably maybe Richardson if you're lucky in that spot. Then
I would say Stroud has a better chance to get to 7 than Levis. Not that that's the order I would have them in.
You're thinking that people are going to overrate Levis,
the workout and all that stuff.
Yeah. No, I agree.
He's been in a pro system for 2 years. I look at it this way. Let's assume the Bears don't take a quarterback. They stay there and they take one of the defenders. Number 2 is Houston. If you're Indianapolis, you're at 4. If you're in love with one of these guys, you have to get ahead of Houston because you don't want him in your division. So maybe they do trade up to 1 with the Bears. So if I'm the Bears, I'm calling Indianapolis and saying, hey, is there a guy you want? Do you want to get ahead of Houston?
Yeah.
So you have to assume 2 quarterbacks are going in the top 4. I don't think Arizona takes one. They can't get out of that Murray contract yet. And then at 5, I don't even know who picks at 5, but I think Detroit's at 6.
Seattle.
Seattle could. Theoretically, I think they're probably more in the market for a defensive player. Their defense is horrendous. Another team that made the playoffs with a terrible defense. That's not does possible. Detroit take one at 6? They might. They need one, but I think they like Goff enough to where they can keep building around him. The question for the Raiders is this: in most drafts, there's a certain number of blue chip players. In my opinion, as of today, January 9th. There's 4 guys that have separated themselves in this draft. And I think that's Stroud, Young, Carter, and Anderson. So that's 4. I'm going to throw Levis in there just because he's a quarterback. That's 5. And there's a big drop off after those first 4. Then you have Levis. And I think Miles Murphy is kind of questionable to be in that next tier. And that's it. There's 5 or 6 really good players. The drop off is at 7. So right where the Raiders are picking is where the draft, I think the talent level falls. So if they're in love with one of those top 4 or 5 guys, they got to go up and get them because they could sit at 7. And if you assume the 3 quarterbacks and those 3 defenders are off the board, where do you go? I'm not a Ringo guy. I would not take Ringo as cornerback 1. And then, so if he's not the guy, then are you taking an offensive lineman there? Are you reaching for Broderick Jones or Paris Johnson or Skoronski from Northwestern? So I don't think they go that route. So they really need an impact defensive player or a quarterback. Would you take Richardson? It's all going to depend on what they do in free agency, obviously. So if they're able to go out and get a veteran quarterback, and let's say the draft rolls that way, then you probably just say you just roll with Brady or Garoppolo instead of them and wait till next year. I like Anthony Richardson. It's hard for me to look at the 53% completion percentage in the SEC, and just how inaccurate he was throwing the football and take him at 7. That's hard for me to do.
Yeah. And like you said, if you cannot get, I think to your point, if you cannot get one of those quarterbacks and then you're sitting there and you need one of those big time defensive players to impact this defensive front for the Raiders, because you got to have somebody. You got to have it. They really have not done a good job as far as building anything, no matter who the GM is. So yeah, it's crazy. I mean, like, I don't even know. I mean, I'm sitting there watching, Kelly and Ziegler with the binoculars on, and the Chief game, and I don't know. It was just tough to
Yeah.
watch.
The other thing is you hear the name Brian Brees from Clemson thrown in there. Defensive tackle, like 5-star. He had 2 sacks last year. Like let's pump the brakes on taking a defensive tackle that had 2 sacks.
Seriously.
It's not like the guy went out and he wrecked games in college. Like,
yeah, that's true. What do you think about the ring around the Rosie thing? Was that would you have liked it? So here's what was going on in Twitter Spaces, and here's what was going on in, like, a lot of people who text me, text me and text the show. They would have liked to seen one person on the Raider defense when they were doing that just take the penalty and just run into that ring around the Rosie and just take the penalty, because like just to stop from being clowned.
you can't do that.
You can't do it. What's just like, it is what it is. So I mean,
I wish Richard Seymour was on the Raiders, because remember what he did to Ben Roethlisberger?
Yes,
I would like to see something like that.
I mean that, and also, like, hey, you know what? How about Teamer just pick the ball off? The ball was how come the ball can be thrown from one end of the one side, the width of the field, and no defender can be around? I love that about the Raiders defense. Like, that ball's in the air forever.
I think it was more of Andy Reid basically saying, "You guys have no chance to beat us. Watch this, and like, we're just going to do this shit."
Yeah,
and they did it. And the Raiders didn't respond.
No, did not respond.
Not only did they let him score on that play, there was a penalty. They let him score on the next play.
No, next play too.
And they're trying to throw balls in the fourth quarter to like defensive tackles in the end zone. It was absurd.
It was absurd. Yeah.
Bring the house. If they're going to leave in like Patrick Mahomes in that kind of game, I'll bring in everyone.
Yeah, I mean, and those are the things that I'm talking about. Like, I feel like he is just like this kindler, gentler head coach who I'm not gonna get mad like last time in Denver. I'm not gonna show my anger. I'm just gonna be that nice. I'll be a nice, presentable human being to everybody, and then that's how I'm gonna coach. And I'm like, dude, like, I mean, this is it's football. Like, the reality of what you're doing is not working, and I just can't deal with that. Albert Breer talked about his interview, the whole thing you talked about with the roster misconceptions of the roster. That is something where, listen, basically when Albert Breer talks, that's Josh McDaniel talking.
It's McDaniels.
It's McDaniels talking. And I would say that this is like, if that is the case, then that's a major red flag to both of y'all. Like, we could tell you about the roster. The fact that you looked at the roster and you thought it was better than it really was, I thought it was crazy. And then also the Jimmy G and Tom Brady talk. We'll talk about that a little bit. So Jimmy G, quote unquote, I guess he said something about like give them a little bit more time. Listen, the minute you sign the contract in the National Football League as a head coach, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. Look how fast. The dude in Arizona got fired today, right? Kingsbury got fired. The GM got fired. They're gonna pay till 2006 to 2026 those contracts. They don't care. These owners don't care. They have plenty of money to pay out these contracts. So like this whole thing where you think you have more time, you don't have any time. What they need to do is have, if it's Brady and Levis next year at quarterback, I mean, as far as like the quarterback room, then have at it. But next year you have to win. You got to make the playoffs. We thought this year was going to be a daunting task when we looked at the division they were playing and the teams that they play. It turns out like a lot of those teams were terrible. And
they had a cupcake schedule this year.
They had a cupcake. You cannot get a more cupcake schedule than that. And they weren't able to take advantage of it. So your thoughts about the Albert Breer stuff with as far as Jimmy G and Tom Brady?
Yeah, he was on the Dan Patrick show, and he said that they're probably more interested in Jimmy G and they equated it to Alex Smith. When Kansas City had Alex Smith, it was a guy that you could try to make the playoffs with. It should keep you in games while they look for the next quarterback, the long-term answer. So if you go get Brady, it's one and done. Like, maybe you give him a 2-year deal and you pray that you can get a second year, but realistically you have to look at it as a 1-year option. So you need to have the future already on the roster with Tom Brady, because if you have Tom Brady, you're going to win 6, 7, 8 games, if not make the playoffs. So you're going to be picking in the late teens to early 20s, you're not going to be able to go get the Drake Mays or the Caleb Williamses of those guys. So if they go the Brady route, they have to basically have that next quarterback in full this year.
Yeah.
If you go the route of Jimmy G and he keeps you competitive and you get the 9 or 10 wins and you make the playoffs, as a 6 or 7 seed, he can buy you a little bit of time to find that next guy. But the key is you have to win with him. You can't bring in Jimmy G and win 5 or 6 games because you're gone. So they seem to think that Brady to Vegas, both Dan Patrick and Albert Breer, was kind of an afterthought behind Tom Brady. But now you're seeing all these reports today that the Raiders are going hard after. And I don't know where these reports are coming from. It's tampering. He's under contract. They can't talk to him. They can't talk to his agent. People just connecting the dots, but they need to be careful by saying, like, they're going all in on Tom Brady. Like, they can't do that right now. I'm sure there's some back channeling stuff goes on. It happens in every industry. But the Raiders need to tread lightly here because we just saw Miami lose a first-round pick for tampering with Brady and Sean Payton last year.
Yeah, no question about it. And then Jimmy G, if you're Jimmy G, can't he just, if I am Jimmy G and Don Yee, I think is the agent for both of them, he could say, like, why can't I just go to New York? Better roster, better defense. I don't have to worry about like somebody, the heir apparent behind me. I just came from a spot where that heir apparent was behind me, and he wasn't, and he doesn't look like the heir apparent. The Mr. Relevant does. So like that's something that you guys think about too. Is like, why would Jimmy G do that? And as far as Tom, I think Tom kind of gives him the best chance to win. It would be probably a 1-year thing. But like, here's the thing: like, you had like, dude, like you like this whole time thing, like the time. I don't understand how these people think they have all this time. Like you don't have time. Look who's getting fired. Like they just fired Lovie Smith can sit down on his couch for 3 more years and just chill. Like, you know what I mean? Like these guys are not, these teams don't care. The NFL just had a big, I think it was either Adam Schefter or Ian Rappaport put out this thing where the league was saying they're really upset at how much, how can I put it? How many people are getting, how many teams are paying head coaches who no longer coach for them? And they were break down every team and how much money and everything like that. And guess what happened this offseason? They still fire coaches who have like 3 or 4 years left on their contract. These owners don't give a fuck. So like, and they just don't care. Like they want the right guy. They want to win. So like this idea that like a quarterback gives them more time, like y'all don't have time. Like if you wanted time, you should have blew it up last year, got rid of Carr, and then take it from there. Like the thing that a lot of the writers are talking about, Ryan, when they say like everybody who interviewed with the Raiders were surprised about how disparaging the ownership and people who work with the Raiders talked about Derek Carr. So if the ownership and everybody else who work for the Raiders are talking bad about Derek Carr and giving you insight to Derek Carr, why would you ride with Derek Carr for the season? Why wouldn't you get rid of him before the season even started, or try to move him then? Because he actually had more trade value probably last season or going into this year than this year.
A couple of things here. Here's the answer to your Jets question. If the Jets don't make the playoffs next year, Robert Saleh is getting fired.
Yes.
A lot of people talk about stability, stable organizations. I got news for you. The NFL turns over 25% of their head coaches every offseason. Exactly. There is no stability in the NFL. You know who the stable organizations are? They're the ones with franchise elite quarterbacks. If you don't have that, you're not a stable organization. New England is stable because Tom Brady and Bill Belichick were there. Pittsburgh was stable because they had been Roethlisberger for all those years. And go around and tell me who the stable organizations are. Like, you're not going to get outside of probably 5 or 6 teams, and you're going to look down and see who the quarterback is of those teams. So this whole idea that like they need to go to a stable organization. Stable organizations have winning quarterbacks. That's what they have. They have elite difference makers at the most important position on the field. In terms of Derek Carr, there's reports they could have got 2 number 1s for him from Indianapolis last year. I don't know how accurate those are, but if you trade Derek Carr last offseason, you can't get Devontae Adams. So maybe they said, you know what? Let's try it for 1 year. Let's bring in Adams. Let's surround Carr with all these weapons, and it didn't work out. Clearly, everyone has seen the results of what happened. In retrospect, they probably should have done that. Yeah, they should have had multiple number 1s last year, kept their own, not traded for Devontae Adams, and started the rebuild last year and built around Max Crosby and Josh Jacobs and some of the younger pieces and the Colton Millers on the roster. That's not what they chose to do. They chose to go all in on a roster that wasn't very good, that had no depth to it. So now they basically have to pivot, and they have to say, you know, what do we do now? Obviously, they can't keep going all in on this roster because there's way too many holes to fill. And that's a result of the poor drafting by the prior regime. So Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler they're closing their eyes and they're pointing, going, but look what Gruden did. Look what Gruden did. This is Gruden's fault. This is Mayock's fault.
Can't do it now.
And Gruden did the same thing. This is Reggie McKenzie's fault. So until someone is an adult in the room and sits down and says, look, like, these are the changes we have to make. This is where the roster's at. It's going to take some time, and sell ownership on that. You're going to continue in this cycle. And if the Raiders want to be a stable organization, they have to give this regime time. And I know everyone wants to get rid of them and throw them out, but you're just going to repeat what the Raiders have been doing for 20 years. So at some point, I know no one likes this coach, and there's a million reasons not to like him, but you're going to have to bite the bullet and just wear it for a couple of years and see what happens. And if they can't figure this thing out in a year or two, the worst thing the Raiders can do is say, we have to make the playoffs next year. Let's go get Tom Brady. Let's spend a ton of money in free agents on older guys and not make it next year and have all these cap hits, because to sign Tom Brady, you're going to have to tack in all these avoidable years to get the cap hit down. And then you're screwed for 3 years after that, because you brought in a bunch of older aging veterans. That's John Gruden's MO. That's what he did the first time with the Raiders. Mm-hmm. He left them with some really bad contracts when he left last time. And this newer team can't do the same thing. So they have to clean the books up. And I'll give Reggie McKenzie credit. That's the one thing he did do. He cleaned up the books, got rid of all the bad contracts, and he had Derek Carr, he had Khalil Mack, he had Amari Cooper. There was pieces to build around, but John Gruden just didn't like those pieces.
Yes, because how could you like Derek Carr, Amari Cooper, and Khalil Mack? I mean, that's just not good football if you like all those three players. It's crazy. I mean, that's a mouthful, but it's the truth. Like, you know what I mean? It's the truth as far as that goes. So as far as a Carr trade goes, okay. So if I'm speaking about a Carr situation where we're talking about trading Derek Carr. Is the contract that he's in more like, should he be working? If you're him, you are more inclined to work with the Raiders to get a trade because you want to keep that money. Because if he goes and gets released, he's not gonna get paid that same salary. Like, there's nobody's giving him, what was it, 32, 42, between 32 and 40 million next year.
It's 3 years, $121 million.
Yeah. So
basically 40 million a year.
40 million a year. So nobody's giving him $40 million a year off of the season he just had. So if they want him, that contract does work in their favor, where they can maybe do like a Matthew Stafford thing, where, like, you know, the trade happens, but everybody knows the trade is going to happen. But when it's only official when the official league year comes through, it's probably in his best financial interest to work with the Raiders to try to find a destination. Correct?
I think it is in his best interest. And I know a lot of people say Derek Carr should say, screw them. If a team's going to trade for that contract, they would just give him into free agency. I would say slow down on that talk, because here's the issue. There's no guaranteed money. There's no bonus on the contract. If I'm the Jets and I trade for Derek Carr, I have outs in the contract immediately. I have to pay him $40 million for 1 year. I get that. But I can release him after a year if it doesn't work out, and there's no dead money. Like, there's $7.5 million for 2024, but that's it. If I sign Derek Carr, let's say instead of a 3-year, $121 million that he gets, let's say I give him 3 years, $80 million, and I give him, 40 or 50 guaranteed, and I have to spread that signing bonus out over 3 to 5 years. If I do voidable years on the back end, I'm going to have a much bigger cap hit on the back end if it doesn't work out. So the advantage for the team is they can secure Carr's services by trading for him. They're going to have to bite the bullet in year 1 and give him that guaranteed money, but there's an out in year 2 right away in that contract. So if you're the acquiring team, you can move on. And the more I think about this, I keep going back to the Khalil Mack trade in the bad sense. Remember how Reggie McKenzie threw in that second round pick just for the hell of it?
Yeah.
What I kind of see happening is the Raiders want to look good in this. So they're going to try to get a first, maybe a second round pick. But what I think is going to happen is, because of the leverage Derek Carr has and the acquiring team, let's say they call the Jets, and the Jets say, we want Derek Carr. I could see a scenario where the Raiders want to look good. So they say, we want your first rounder, which is like the 13th pick, but the Raiders are going to have to send back their second rounder. So it may be Derek Carr and the Raiders' second pick for the Jets' first pick, or Derek Carr and the Raiders' third round pick for a second round pick. Or it could be a second round pick this year with conditional picks in 2024, like a fourth rounder that could become a third. So I don't think the Raiders are going to get 3 or 4 picks in this draft, because that would be insane for a team to trade for Derek Carr, take on that contract, then deplete half their draft capital. So it'll be 1 pick in this year's draft with a conditional, or the Raiders are going to have to send a pick back the other way. So I think the Raiders can save face by saying they get the 13th pick from the Jets, but then we're sending 38 or whatever their second round pick with Derek Carr to go back. So they lose out their second. So basically it's a pick swap. They move up 25 picks.
Yeah. I still like, I mean, I know there's a lot of different spots where he could go. Where does Atlanta pick?
Atlanta picks right after them.
Right after them. They pick 8th. So, I mean, you know, Atlanta. I mean, I think that's probably a good destination for him. You know,
who's coaching in Atlanta? Is Arthur Smith still going to be there?
We don't know. We don't know.
That's not a stable organization. If Derek Carr wants stable, it's not Atlanta.
Oh, there's what
again. I go back to what's stable. There's 2 stable organizations in the entire league. It's New England and Baltimore. That's it right now.
Do you want to go
maybe Pittsburgh?
You want to go through the whole list and say, you know, so you go through the list and say what's talking about who's stable? Like it's not.
There's 3 teams.
There's nobody. There's absolutely nobody. I mean, the Broncos just fired their coach after 1 year again. Like, you know what I mean? So many, please. Like, I mean, you know, and
Did you say the 49ers? I would say yes. I would say
for right now.
That's 4. Like you're not going to get this 7 or 8 teams.
Yeah. Tampa Bay. Yes.
Are they stable? Yeah. Like Bruce Arians just went peace out, and they may fire Todd Bowles after 1 year. And the ownership group there, the Glazers, don't have the best track record.
They can't find. I mean, we're gonna have 10 openings. Watch. I mean,
they'll probably keep him because they made the playoffs. But
yeah,
is that coaching staff? Like even if he comes back, they may say, "Hey, you need a new offensive coordinator." Like we're done with Leftwich, and if Brady leaves, like
how the mighty have fallen with Brian Leftwich, huh? How the mighty have fallen. You gotta let me tell you. I mean, like that. I mean, I'm not sure. You know, if that is, you know, that's where one where like maybe the misses are like, hey, we could have went home, baby. Like we could have went home to Jacksonville, and you could have been coaching. You'd been coaching the kid with the long hair, and you've been good to go. You've been good to go as far as that goes. Yeah. So tough situation there. So I do think a trade. Obviously, a trade is going to be in the work. I mean, I think it kind of makes sense for everybody involved for a trade to go through.
If I'm the acquiring team, I want that contract because I can get out of it. I don't want to have to give him a $50 million.
Exactly. And in some of these teams like Atlanta or maybe the Panthers, they're in really bad divisions. Like they're in bad divisions. So like even if like there's no way for that division to become a dominant division in one off season. So if you do get Derek Carr and all you have to do is win, I mean they won 7 games. The Cardinals won, not Cardinals. The Falcons won 7 games this year. So, you know, a couple games here, a couple games there, a couple games there. I mean, they could have easily won the division. And the Tennessee was 1 game away. I mean, if Dobbs isn't starting that game and Carr is, maybe they beat the Jacksonville Jaguars. As far as that goes, you know, but you better acquire Zay Jones because Zay Jones seems to be the key to a success.
Hey, the Raiders are going to get a 5th round compensatory pick for Zay Jones. So ball out, Zay. You're helping out the Raiders.
Oh my goodness.
Did he have 80 catches?
Well, what was it? Yeah, what was Zay Jones? I got what was Zay Jones? Because Carr made Zay Jones, so I got to see.
If he made Zay Jones, then what did Trevor Lawrence do?
Yeah, he made him into Jerry Rice. Let's see here. I just want to look at his numbers real quick. Zay Jones.
I mean, if I'm the Raiders, I might do that. I might take the 13th pick from the Jets and send back my second. I would try to send back a 3rd, but they're going to want to pick in this year's draft.
Yeah, they're going to want that.
It'd be nice to be picking 7 and 13. Then you have the ammo to go up to 1 if you want to.
If they want to do that, but the drop off is 82 catches, 5 touchdowns, 823 yards for Zay Jones.
See, and you also have to think if you're Ziegler, and I know everyone wants to trade Darren Waller, but if you're Ziegler and McDaniels and you need to win next year, why would you trade Darren Waller?
I think it's clear. I think it's clear the common sense person to trade here. And I mean,
it's Hunter Renfrow.
Cover your ears, Raider fans. It's Hunter. It's Hunter Renfrow. He doesn't fit. He's not going to get the touches. I know people keep replaying the play over the middle against the Chiefs over and over again. And so he's just built different, all this other stuff like that. I get it. I get the allure see, we as fans, it is easier to cheer for a guy who kind of looks like a fan who plays football professionally than a guy who is 6'6" and you don't want ever to meet your wife or girlfriend. And Darren Waller, like I totally get it.
I stood next to Waller on the sideline this year when I did.
He
the
is
flex.
massive.
He's
dude.
a monster.
He's a master. He's a massive. I actually went out with some friends last night, and I met my Uber ride back home, because if I drink, I'm gonna always have an Uber. It was I rode in. The lady picked me up, and it was Raiders Storm. She's like a super fan. So we're talking Raiders the whole time. The whole time, she just came back from Vegas and that game, and she was saying the same thing about. I mean, that dude is huge. I mean, like,
he's built different.
He's the one who's built different. He's the one who's built different as far as
I think too with Hunter Renfrow. I looked at the contract that he has a bunch of money that guarantees on the third day of the league year, which would be like March, I don't know, 17th or 18th. So if the Raiders are able to move him before that, like if they have a trade set up and they can move him like the first or second day of the new league year, it's a much less cap it than if they wait 3 days, because on the third day, I think there's like, don't quote me on this, but there's like $4 million of guarantees for his base salary. And then there's a roster bonus that he collects. So if he's on the roster the third day of the new league year, then the cap hit, it's like $13 million. If the Raiders traded him after that, they would have like $7 million in dead money. But if they trade him before that, the dead money is a little bit cheaper. So Ziegler did build some outs into some of these contracts. The no trade clause of Derek Carr, never understood why he put that in the contract, but he did. And now the Raiders may have to release him and get nothing for him because they did that. But
does he sign?
This offense runs much better with Waller than it would with Renfrow, because you can just put Adams, and it's much easier to go. You're paying a slot receiver $13 million. Like, look at Christian Kirk. I know he got paid a ton of money, but like a speed guy in the slot really changes this offense. Like Hunter Renfrow's not that guy. He's the intermediate, jukey, shifty, catch the 5-yard pass, make a guy miss, get 8 yards. Like if you had a vertical threat out of the slot, this offense would look much different.
Yeah, and we saw that. We saw with this team too. Like when one of those guys, like I think when Waller was out, teams were just like bracketing the hell out of him, and he could do all those jukes all he wants, but there's two people standing right there, and he couldn't get open. So, you need somebody more dynamic. There's a reason why that. Like I don't think I've ever even seen him run a 9 route in this offense, Hunter Renfrow. So, yeah. So
he ran one against Pitt, or he ran a deep route against Pittsburgh.
Yeah. How that? Oh yeah, he was open though. I can't.
And don't get me wrong, I love Hunter Renfrow. I love him for what he is. Do I think he's worth $16 million for what he had? 36 catches in this offense. Like I know he only played 10 or 11 games, but like you're about what you're going to get in this offense with him is 60 for 600 to 700 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns. That's what you're going to get. Like, is the juice worth the squeeze there?
I love that one.
I don't know.
It's not.
Not a $16 million or a $13 million cap hit.
Give me a corner. If you're doing that. Anything else you want to address as far as like this debacle of a season? Because this season has been pretty bad one in a lot of ways, especially if you consider if they just split these games that they had a lead in, they would have made the playoffs. And listen, none of these teams are complete teams. So like the the narrative about the defense, you can throw away, because there's a lot of bad defensive teams in this whole thing. There's a lot of teams with bad offensive lines in the playoff this year as well too. So if you're hanging on that, Raider Nation, that's not where you need to be, because
the Raiders with worst defenses off the top of my head that made the playoffs: Vikings, Chargers, Chiefs. Statistically, Dolphins. That's at least 4, without even bringing it up.
Yeah, not good stuff there. So, not good stuff.
I think the one thing I could say to Raider Nation is buckle up. The next month is going to be very tumultuous, because we're going to hear sides from Derek Carr again. We're going to hear sides from the Raiders. We're going to hear a lot of stuff between now and February 15th until that decision gets made. And both parties are going to try to paint it like they made the right decision. So we're going to hear more from the Carr camp about how the Raiders did him wrong. We're going to hear more from Ziegler, McDaniels through the mouthpieces that they use, the Hondo Carpenters, the Vinny B's, the Vic Tafers, the Tayshaun Reeds, and you're going to hear the Raiders side of it. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but this ongoing battle is going to continue. And then even once Derek Carr's off this roster, it's still going to continue, because everything is going to be, the Raiders lose the opening game next year. How many times are we going to see it's Carr's fault? It's Carr's fault. It's time to pull a Tony Sperano, bury that football, and root for this team moving forward. and try to get together as Raider Nation and just win, baby. And hopefully we don't get just try hard, baby, like Josh McDaniels said in his press conference today.
So the Vikings gave up 427 points this year. That is more than the Raiders. And they went 13-4.
They got blown out 3 times in their 4 losses.
I mean, and that's working, but that's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of points to give up. The Seahawks gave up 401.
That's Paul Gunther territory.
401. Man, it's pretty bad.
Isn't Gunther in Minnesota as like an assistant? I thought he went over there with Zimmer.
Yeah, very, very. He's trying to teach him his complex double gap scheme that he learned from Zimmer. I guess
he never ran with the Raiders.
Never ran with the Raiders. I'd never seen. Was there anybody ever in it? Was there ever 2 people in the gap, linebackers in the gap with the Raiders? I thought we were getting that. It's just funny. Like here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna learn from Mike Zimmer something that has worked for Mike Zimmer for years, and then obviously the league, the league evolves and you can't do it. It works very well for him. So that could be my base, and I can just kind of do some new stuff off of it. But I'm just not going to do it at all, and then be bad. These young coaches, man, I tell you, he's not young anymore. But I just think that's funny. I think that's funny. Bree, I know you got to go soon, so we'll talk about other stuff in the next show.
There's plenty to talk about for the next.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about as far as that.
Till we get to training camp.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Ray Nation. I know you have a lot of draft questions. We're gonna do some draft stuff, all that stuff like that. So I'm gonna I put those in the vault, and then we'll kind of have those. We have a lot of time before the draft starts, and another disappointing year for the Raiders. But we will we'll try to hopefully they listen to the show and draft who we like, because those guys usually do good as far as that goes. All right, Ryan.
All right. Take care.
Take care.